who are darker than blue. Don't let us hang around this town and let what others say come true. We're just good for nothing, they all figure. A boy's grown up shirtless jigger.
Peace, everybody. Today is Friday, October 10th, and it is 5 o'clock p.m. So that must mean that I am Jackie Lukman, and this is Darker Than Blue, the show where we talk about politics for the people who that you just heard Brother Curtis Mayfield say are darker than blue. That's me and you, folks. Hey, how are you doing? Thank you so much, and welcome, dear listeners, on WPFW 89.3 FM and online at WPFWFM.org. And dear viewers on Black Liberation Media on YouTube and Facebook, Lukman Nation on Patreon, Facebook, and Instagram. And welcome to everyone trying out the new WPFW app. That's right, y'all, where you can listen to all your favorite programming on the go wherever you are, right in the palm of your hand. So last week, folks, I talked about the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine, the passage of the 1996 Telecommunications Act, and how the media consolidation that those two things facilitated created the information desert of a media landscape that we have today. Now, there are certainly plenty of channels for people to choose from these days, and more news outlets are being offered on streaming services, in addition to the traditional network affiliated news on ABC, NBC, CBS channels in local markets, and even the cable news mainstays, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. But as I ended with last week, who controls the local markets actually might matter more than who creates the content or who controls and owns the content that is broadcast on those local channels. Because in a lot of cases and locations, one company controls what information is broadcast on local news programs all across this country, regardless of what parent company owns the programming. That company, in the context of what we were talking about last week, which was the Jimmy Kimmel fiasco, that company was Sinclair Broadcast Group. And so last week, I brought them up a little bit, but I sort of buried the lead a little bit and ended up running out of time. But at the very end, I did get to Sinclair. What we need to understand about Sinclair in the context of this Kimmel thing, but in a larger context also, is that they own and operate hundreds of local television stations across the United States. And they famously force their local stations to air centrally produced, what they call must-run segments, which often feature politically conservative commentary about national news that's aired in local markets. And this means that viewers in different cities are seeing the exact same partisan content presented under the banner of their trusted local news station, but it actually is not local news, and it's not even the truth about what is happening in another city, which undermines the very concept of local independent journalism and the idea of the news supposing to exist to provide viewers with the unbiased truth and all perspectives on a topic so the people can make up their minds themselves, right? But if we look at the current media landscape in the country, we have what I also talked about last week, which are the 6 major companies that control over 90% of the media that we consume. Now, what we believe we understand about these 6 companies, we think we know who's responsible for all of this. Because, look, there have been 6 companies that have been identified as accurately controlling the majority of U.S. media. But that landscape has shifted with recent corporate activity. So today, the consolidation that created this top heavy 6 companies that control 90% of the media we consume, even that has shifted a little bit, with the largest media conglomerates having to expand to include streaming services and online platforms. But based on the recent mergers and acquisitions that created these 6 media conglomerates, they are Comcast, which includes NBC Universal, and NBC Universal includes NBC, Telemundo, MSNBC, CNBC, the USA Network. The streaming service Peacock is also included in NBC. I'm sorry, in Comcast, but not a part of NBC Universal. But the streaming service Peacock is owned by Comcast, which is why it ain't free no more, and the cable provider Xfinity. Then we have the Walt Disney Company, which owns ABC. Y'all knew that from Jimmy Kimmel. ESPN, FX, Hulu, Disney Plus, and major studios, including Walt Disney Pictures, Pixar, Marvel Studios, and Lucasfilm. This is why you can't just boycott a movie or a television station, because they are never alone in their complicity of any of this. Okay, then we've got Warner Brothers Discovery. And this was a product of a merger between Warner Media and Discovery Incorporated back in 2022. And this merger, Warner Brothers Discovery, owns CNN, HBO, TBS. I think that's Turner Broadcasting Service. I didn't know they were still around, but yep, they are. The streaming service Max, which used to be called HBO Max, but now they're just called Max because of a lawsuit. Very confusing. And the Warner Brothers Film and TV Studios. Then there's Paramount Global, which was formed from the merger of CBS and Viacom. And they own CBS, Showtime, Paramount Pictures, Comedy Central, MTV, and the streaming service Paramount Plus. Then, of course, there's Fox Corporation, which is the spinoff of Rupert Murdoch's News Corp. And Fox Corporation primarily owns all of the Fox broadcast networks, including Fox News, Fox Sports, and the streaming service Tubi. I did not know that until today, dear friends. Tubi, stop watching. Yeah. Then there's the Alphabet Corporation, also known as Google. That's how we know it. But the Alphabet Corporation, even though it's not a traditional media company, it is included in this list because it is a dominant force in the digital space through YouTube and its advertising platforms, making Alphabet a major distributor of content and controller of online information flow. That's a whole nother conversation right there. So I'm guessing you're wondering, which somebody did ask me last week after the show, where does Sinclair fit in all of this? Because Sinclair is not on this list, right? Of the corporations that control 90% of the media in this country. And that's what I didn't have time to get to last week. So that's why we're talking about it today. So let's be clear that Sinclair is one of the most powerful and controversial media players in the US, despite the fact that it's not included in the traditional Big Six list of national media conglomerates that I just named. Its influence comes not from owning the companies that create the content or owning the content or creating the content itself. Sinclair's influence comes from owning or operating nearly 200 local television stations across more than 100 markets in this country. And Sinclair is actually the second largest owner of local TV stations by number. I did not know that. I thought they were the largest, but oh no, they're just the second largest. But Sinclair exerts significant control over local news programming and is also the largest owner of stations affiliated with major networks like Fox, NBC, CBS, and ABC. Sinclair is also known for its politically conservative messaging in its local news broadcasts of national news stories. The company has been noted for requiring its stations to air what they call must run segments and commentary that promote conservative viewpoints. And this practice actually drew national attention that you remember. You just probably didn't connect the company name to what you saw in 2018 after a segment was exposed showing dozens of local anchors, news anchors, on these local Sinclair owned television stations reading an identical corporate mandated script about a news story. That was Sinclair. Their local news properties allow Sinclair to push national stories with this scripted conservative slant into local markets across the country, which of course influences local political discourse about national issues. But like I said, Sinclair is only the second largest owner of local television stations that broadcast the content of the Big Six. The other, the biggest or the bigger of the two, is a company I bet you've never heard of. I didn't hear about it until I was reading about this to do this show. That other company is called Nexstar, Nexstar. Nexstar Media Group owns ABC affiliated stations in cities including Nashville, Tennessee, New Orleans, Louisiana, Salt Lake City, Utah, and a lot of smaller markets, including Evansville, Indiana, Binghamton, New York, and a bunch of other smaller markets. But in all, the company owns or partners with more than 200 stations in 116 US markets, more than Sinclair, and they own broadcast networks like the CW. Yes, that lovely network where all of those teen friendly shows you are letting your kids watch. Yep, fantastic. And News Nation, as well as the political website, another thing I did not know that I learned today, The Hill. Nexstar Media Group owns The Hill, and nearly a third of the Food Network. So even you foodies are not immune from media consolidation and the politics behind it, because even Nexstar, with the outsized influence they have with the 200 plus local television stations that they own, they're actually wanting to get bigger, because last month they announced a $6.2 billion deal that they wanted to enter into with this company called Tegna Incorporated. That's spelled Tegna Incorporated. And Tegna owns 64 other TV stations. Sinclair Broadcast Group is based in Hunt Valley, Maryland, not too far from where I am right now. They operate 38 local ABC affiliates, and Sinclair owns, operates, or provides services to, compared to Nexstar's more than 200, Sinclair owns, operates, or provides services to 178 TV stations in around 81 markets affiliated with all the major broadcast networks. And they even own the Tennis Channel. There is not a hobby that you have, there is not an interest that you are looking to feed or support or learn more about, that you are not going to be impacted by some type of politically conservative content, because politically conservative companies more than likely own the local television stations that you are feeding your hobbies information with. I'm trying to get the tense correctly. There you go. So the ABC affiliates of Sinclair include stations here in Washington, D.C., in Portland, Oregon, Chattanooga, Tennessee, and other cities like that. Now, the Nexstar deal would require the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, to change the rules limiting the number of stations a single company can own. Now, remember, we talked last week about how the FCC, because of the Telecommunications Act of 1996, changed the rules for how many local stations a single company can own to create the media consolidation that exists now, in which Sinclair and Nexstar own together or separately, independently for each company, over 100 local news stations. So we're talking upwards of 400 local news stations that two companies own and control the content that you are seeing. You thinking you're watching local news, and you're not. You're watching Sinclair News, you're watching Nexstar News, and it's all given to you with a clear conservative slant and narrative. Now, the FCC's chair, Brendan Carr, has, of course, expressed openness to changing whatever rule exists. I guess when the Telecommunications Act was passed, the FCC reduced the restriction of one company being able to own a number, whatever number of local TV stations. They increased that number to 200. And now that these two companies are approaching that threshold, they want the FCC to either eliminate the threshold or raise it again. And the FCC, according to the current chair, Brendan Carr, well, of course, he's expressed openness to do it because he's a capitalist, just like Sinclair and Nexstar and their CEOs and boards of directors are. And capitalists do not like regulation because regulations tell capitalists that they cannot break the law to make money. They cannot violate people's rights to make money. They cannot destroy the environment to make money. And they can't do all of these things to make even more money than they are already making. Regulations tell capitalists that they have to abide by rules on how they make their money and even what they do with some of it regarding taking care of the property, the environment that their business impacts, and even the people who they employ and those who live around their businesses. All these regulations that the capitalists don't like, well, they cost money for the company to spend to make sure that the air, the water, the land, and the people around it and who are involved with it are not hurt in some way by the company's actions, negligence, laziness, and just flat out hatred of working class and poor people. And then corporations are supposed to have to pay taxes to the local jurisdictions that their businesses are in so that the community around them can benefit from whatever success the company has while they are engaging in their business. At least, that's what they tell us. These companies that are allegedly good corporate neighbors or, our friendly neighborhood big box store. You know how they talk about Walmart. Our friendly neighborhood Walmart. They're not that friendly. Or Amazon or the data center that's coming to a neighborhood near you. That's how these corporations are presented to the people in the neighborhoods that their operations are about to ravage. But we all know that's a lie because capitalists want to not just make money. They don't want to be good neighbors to working class and poor people. They don't want to be good corporate examples for anything other than making more money because that's what they want to do. They want to make more money than they've made before. And since they don't really innovate or create anything new, despite the persistent lie that they tell us that capitalism is the only thing on the planet that fosters innovation, well, this is why capitalists turn to cutting spending to increase their profits. And that always means firing workers, cutting benefits, cutting hours, reducing salaries to lower what they call labor costs. That's what they mean when they say labor costs. This means when they do these things that they show more income on paper by paying less money to other people for worker compensation by either slashing their workforce and turning to so-called automation, or saying they will, or by reducing benefits or hours of current workforces to streamline it. That's what they call it. But really, all they're doing is pocketing the money they saved by getting rid of the people. And this also means paying less money on environmental and other infrastructural regulations that corporations are supposed to follow for safety, waste removal, workplace health, and that kind of thing. This is where deregulation comes in handy for capitalists, because this is how they get away with not paying for those, inspections for a clean workplace and to ensure that they're complying with these safety and environmental measures. They pay lobbyists money to get legislation passed that weakens or eliminates those regulations for them. It's a lot less expensive for them to pay the lobbyists to get the regulations passed than it is for them to continually pay to make sure that they are, doing what they're supposed to do as good corporate neighbors and obeying and adhering to all of these regulations. See, because they also bully local governments into agreeing to sell them land in their cities at cheap prices and force them to have taxpayers pay for building their companies' warehouses or manufacturing plants, what few of them there are left in this country, using the promise of jobs that will be brought to the region, that will allegedly raise the standard of living for the community and bring in revenue for the city. That's the lie they tell us, but we all know that these deals end up destroying neighborhoods where working class and poor people live to make way for these projects, to clear that land of the people and the housing, the homes and the neighborhoods and communities of the people who live there. Then the company hires local residents, the few that they do, for the lowest paying jobs they have with few or no benefits, which do not improve the standard of living for the community. And on top of that, the company's agreement with the city is a tax exempt deal, not for a few years, usually for decades, where the company, like say Amazon, does not have to pay taxes to the city at all for an agreed upon period of time. So the area gets no benefit from the establishment of an Amazon warehouse or a Tesla data center, but the company makes millions and billions of money of profit, most of which they keep in their pockets because of the close and constant organized efforts of finance capital to keep workers' wages and benefits and compensation packages suppressed, to keep labor not full-time, fully compensated, to not contribute to the tax base for the community in those cities. And earlier I said they bullied city council leaders. I have to take that back. They're not bullying these people, because the people who are on the city councils, most of them are capitalists too. So they're not being forced into these agreements by Amazons and Walmarts. They welcome them because guess what? They get their kickbacks too. They get their check from the major corporation too. So when we understand this is how corporations work in this society, media, news, and information in this country really doesn't operate all that much differently, as the media consolidation we're talking about today is driven by the same capitalist greed. It's only done with news and information. And we see that the result of this is not just everybody being sold one type of sweater, but in 68 different colors and patterns. It's still the same doggone sweater. But we see in the media landscape the result of capitalist greed in this space. We see that it results in the spread, entrenchment, and continued perpetuation of bigoted, false, and dangerous ideas about people that do cause people harm. While local TV affiliates broadcast their own programming, like local news, that again isn't always really local, they also contract with national broadcasters and pay them to air their national programming, splitting advertising revenue and fees from cable companies. But this is but there is something that is far more important than mere profits from ad revenue that we're talking about here, because as we're watching Trump and Kristi Noem and Stephen S.S. Miller openly, bald-facedly, shamelessly lying about Portland being burned to the ground by roving gangs of Antifa, them having captured the Antifa leader's girlfriend. I can't believe they actually just and hoping to make her talk about the vast network of Antifa operating in sleeper cells, in tunnels underneath every house in the US. Oh, wait a minute. Wait. That's the lie the Israelis told about Hamas. That's not what. Okay, sorry. I was getting my media lies from the empire mixed up. But I hope you understand how important it is that the two largest owners of local television stations that carry national news to residents in smaller cities and little old towns across this country are avowedly conservative in their ideology and actively skew how they report national news stories to those local markets and the people in them. I hope you can see how dangerous this has become and where it has led, that we've paid no attention to the Sinclairs and the Nexstars involved in all this while focusing solely on the Disneys and the ABCs. Because remember now, Sinclair made headlines in 2018. I mean, the plot was right there for us to pick it up and read the whole book, when a video that was stitched together of dozens of news anchors on Sinclair-owned local stations, reading that identical statement about the troubling trend of irresponsible one-sided news stories plaguing the country. Now, that story, I think, was about Russiagate, right? And that was the line. They had all of those news anchors reading that story in little towns and smaller cities all across this country, saying that what was being said about Russiagate not being true was one-sided news stories plaguing the country. And that went viral. That itself was an irresponsible one-sided news story cooked up by Sinclair that they broadcast across the country. And Sinclair, of course, didn't disclose or admit that it ordered their anchors to read the statement, but of course they did, because that's what they do. And guess what? Nexstar does the same thing. Danilo Yannick, professor of public policy at the University of Delaware, said that the company Nexstar is, quote, the biggest duplicator, end quote, of news content today. His research showed that Nexstar stations duplicated broadcasts more than any other affiliate owner. This means there is little to no real local news being broadcast in most local markets owned by these companies. So people do not get stories of unfair evictions, landlords harassing tenants, employers violating their workers' rights, or local residents being harassed, abused, or murdered by local police. What those people get, lots and lots of, is constant stories on national news items with a conservative slant about leftists or blacks or immigrants allegedly demanding special treatment for nothing and burning cities to the ground when we don't get our way. That's the way the struggles for human rights that we have been engaged in all our lives have been broadcast to all those people who voted for Trump again, and who still support him and will continue to support him despite the Epstein file stuff. I need y'all to understand that these people don't care about whatever else this man does. They really don't care about the Epstein file stuff. They believe that what Trump has been and is saying about us and these issues is the truth, because that is what they are being shown on their local news stations run by the politically and socially conservative capitalist corporate bosses who make sure people believe exactly what they need to keep them voting for, with voting for conservative policies that both parties give them for those votes. Lauren Harold, an editor of a book called Local TV, which is very entertaining and very fascinating, said the web of companies involved in getting Americans their television shows is relatively unknown to most viewers, though their influence has been made known for decades. Often, Harold said, that's been when local affiliates have resisted airing something they viewed as controversial, like the episode of the 1990s comedy. Remember, Ellen had a sitcom before she had a talk show, Ellen, in which Ellen DeGeneres' character came out as gay. Now, I swear to God, if you've watched that show, you knew. She didn't have to go, but she did, and people lost their mind. Some people lost their mind. The conservative people lost their mind, although they sat there and watched her be gay. and they waited until she said it and decided to pitch a boogie woogie about it. But instead of the networks, the corporate bosses, anybody, politicians, the pastors, anybody telling these people that they have the ultimate power over what they want to or do not want to see by simply turning the channel, watching something else, or turning the TV off, going for a walk, whatever, and allowing those who do want to see that content to have access to it. But companies like Sinclair and Nexstar instead looked at the complaints of the conservatives in their television markets and removed that programming, claiming they were appealing to the values of the viewers in their market. No, they were not. And when they say that today, they are not. What they are doing is carrying out censorship because some conservatives don't like television programming that's not in line with their narrow beliefs. And instead of them saying, this is not what I want to see, so I will not watch it, or this is not what I want my kids to see, so we will not watch this in our house, these people actively push for the removal of that program from the entire market, so it's not available for anybody. And because the companies that control the local television stations are conservative anyway, then they use the sentiments of the conservatives in their market as justification for not airing content or removing content that they already were not going to air because the owners of the local stations are conservatives and want to push a conservative agenda. They merely use the voice of the viewer, in this case, the conservative viewers only, as justification for action they were going to take anyway. But it's really just a self-fulfilling, vicious circle jerk of bigotry, ignorance, and censorship. Rinse, repeat. Then go vote for the person who says they will protect what you value. This whole argument about the values of everyday Americans being so vastly different from Hollywood movies, television shows, even music and video games is so ridiculous. Because the implication is that most Americans, particularly in the Midwest and South, are opposed to the diversity of people, ideas, and perspectives being presented by Hollywood/big city media. But the truth is that America's own history of racism and other biases and the lasting legacy of it has created that ideology among many white Americans. Hollywood isn't trying to push abhorrent culture onto good, God-fearing white middle Americans. Those people have always felt that way about us and do not want to be confronted with the lies about us that they already believe. And Sinclair and Nexstar and these kind of media consolidation operations ensure that these people get the news that fits their biases to keep them supporting the conservative political agenda. But all right, look, y'all, you know it's about time for a station break, dear friends, because I got to catch my breath. I got to calm down a little bit. I got to hydrate a little bit. So while I do that, why don't you check out what our engineer extraordinary has on tap for us this week?
The DC Palestinian Film and Arts Festival is back this October with powerful Palestinian storytelling through live performance, films, and discussions with artists and activists, a culinary workshop, and a special children's program. The festival kicks off on Thursday, October 9th, and runs through Sunday, October 12th at MLK Library and other venues. On Friday evening, the festival will present the DC premiere of A State of Passion, which follows Dr. Ghassan Abu Sittah, who, after working around the clock in Gaza under relentless bombardment, has become the face of a global resistance. Details at dcpfaf.org.
Thank you so much. And as I am sure our hearts soar with the jubilation that we have seen among the people of Gaza as the ceasefire so far has actually happened a couple of days after it was allegedly agreed to, and the state, that state, I hate calling their name, finally decided to stop bombing Gaza and adhere to the ceasefire. At least so far, we have to remain vigilant about watching that situation, because we know how they, meaning the white supremacist apartheid ethno state of Israel, we know how they lie. So we celebrate with our Palestinian brothers and sisters for their moment of peace and their ability to go back to their destroyed communities and rebuild what is theirs. But we remain vigilant with them, ready to continue standing right next to them and behind them resolutely when they have to pick up the fight, because they will. So let's get back to this conversation about media consolidation, which is also important in that context, because media consolidation and what I'm telling you they do with news is exactly why so many people are deeply confused about genocide and how in the world a coup plotter can get a Nobel Peace Prize. That's what this country is, because we're living the result of the decades of media consolidation that have been going on in this country, and we paid far too little attention to it, right? So look at the ridiculous claims, excuse me, being made by this regime about Antifa and Portland. And I know I see over in the chat here on Black Liberation Media and on Instagram, there are a few people who are in Portland. I know who you are. Thank you so much for chiming in and letting us know everything's fine in Portland. There are frogs and unicorn. Well, you know, there are people dressed up in frog and unicorn and dinosaur costumes dancing. They're line dancing. Yes, they are protesting ICE, but nobody's burning down anything. Now, what is happening in Portland is that ICE is tear gassing the local police. Huh. Interesting. Anyway, yeah, thank y'all for who are in Portland letting us know that it's not a war zone, but we knew that. But thank you for letting us know for sure. But you know, for people who don't have the benefit of knowing people who are kind of all over the country, it's been shocking to hear this kind of stuff coming from this regime about Portland and Antifa, because the lies, I mean, they are unbelievably stupid for those of us who know better. They're just dumb. You and I, dear friends, know that there is no such thing as an organization called Antifa, and that Antifa is short for anti-fascist. And the only people who would be opposed to anti-fascist would be fascists, right? But Trump signing an executive order declaring a non-existent organization a terrorist organization, that's not based on facts, because that's not what's being sold to his base. That's not what's being delivered to them in the news they consume. They don't get facts. Because of the influence and control of companies like Sinclair and Nexstar in local news markets, folks will gladly air the lies that Trump and Kristi Noem say about this non-existent organization, Antifa, and talking about arresting the girlfriend of one of the alleged founders of Antifa, and allegedly interviewing her to get more information from her, interviewing alleged or former members of Antifa who are fully masked So you don't know who it is, because if they took the masks and the baseball caps off, people would easily know that's not somebody from Antifa. That's Chad. That's my cousin. He's the founding member of Turning Point USA at such and such university. Do you understand? They have to make this stuff up because they know they're lying. It doesn't matter that they know they're lying, because they also know that Sinclair and Nexstar will air their lies, broadcast their lies to everybody around the country. And by the way, this is not something that just the Trump administration does, because the same conservative, slanted narratives about the struggles for human rights, dignity, and peace that our people have been engaged in for years, from the uprisings against racist police terrorism to protests against Palestinian genocide. The same right-wing narratives were delivered to white folks in middle America in these smaller markets by the same companies during the Biden administration. So all of these protests on college campuses, people got images of the protests and they got images of the students being beaten up, but they didn't get the actual truth about the demonstrations. They got the right-wing conservative lies about these protests and these students being anti-Semitic. They got Hillary Clinton on an interview saying, well, these kids are basically stupid. They don't know what they don't know what they know. This was done during the Biden administration too. There does not need to be a Republican in office for national news, particularly about issues that affect working class, poor, Black, brown, and indigenous people. A Republican doesn't need to be in office in order for the media to lie about what happens to us, because Democrats, remember what I told you a few months ago about the rightward shift of the Democratic Party, the third way strategy that they established when they decided they wanted to grow their party and entrench their power by drawing moderate Republican voters. So they changed their platform from advocating for working class and poor, Black, brown, queer, women, and labor rights. They said, forget all that. Let's pivot to tough on crime. Let's pivot to privatization. Let's see what else moderate Republicans are in tune with what's important to them, and let's tell them we're going to do those things for them so we can get some of those people to vote for us. Democrats have been supportive of Sinclair and Nexstar strategies also, because they benefited from them too, right? So I just want to be clear about that. So these politicians and their media lackeys, they're all conservative folks. They want people to not only see what they say about what is going on in cities where the majority of their supporters do not live. So that's why they can say any kind of crazy thing, because they know their voters are not going to go. They're not coming to Portland. They're not coming to Washington, D.C. No, because they know that their ideological allies in Sinclair and Nexstar will only show them what they want them to see, and that will be enough for those people to continue to believe these lies about Black protests, about leftist protests, Democrat-run cities, crazed commies running amok and burning down beautiful America. Because here's what they all know that we don't understand, I think, and that many of us don't like to admit if we do understand it. White people still don't want to live around or near most of us. So they know very little about us. They continue to believe racist stereotypes that are historical, that's true, but that are also continually perpetuated today by these biased media narratives that they prefer to see and hear in the news they receive. And those biased media narratives only serve to confirm those racist beliefs about non-white people that keeps those white people from wanting to know more or differently than they do. See, it's a self perpetuating, vicious cycle of white supremacist, racist, and xenophobic propaganda that justifies itself with every 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 11 o'clock news broadcast all across the country in these little towns and in smaller cities. Populated by mostly white people who do not live anywhere near Black people, the population of Black and brown people in a lot of these places, less than 1%, if that much. And they are absolutely organized and set this whole system up to do precisely this right under our noses. Because the racial segregation that persists in this country is not just about the physical proximity of different groups of people to each other, it also involves the separation of racial ideas or the delivery of certain racial ideas to white people about people they do not want to live around, that they don't live around, that ultimately validate those racist reasons for not wanting to live around us. So back in 2020, I came across this a report on a study that was carried out by Rice University's Kinder Institute for Urban Research. I think that's how you pronounce it. Kinder. It's Kindr. On the study was on how residential segregation rewards whites while punishing people of color. That's actually the name of the report, the title of the report that they produced for the study. And I thought that now is a really good time to revisit the study, in which they say this: residential segregation is the linchpin of racial inequality in U.S. metro cities, metropolitan cities. It drives unequal access to quality education. It significantly drives the large wealth gaps that exist between racial groups, now somewhere on the order of a 20-to-1 advantage for whites compared to Blacks or Hispanics. Again, I didn't use that word, it's in the article. But now, this wealth gap between whites and Black and brown people used to be 10-to-1 in the 1980s. Here we are 20 years later, it's doubled. This extreme wealth gap, they say, occurs in part because of greater demand for white neighborhoods. This is not accidental, which drives up their housing value, and in part because of racially biased appraisal processes, which new research, or it was new at the time, from the Kinder Institute Associates found has grown since 1980. They analyzed data for the 107 U.S. metropolitan cities with populations of more than 500,000 people from 1980 to 2015. And they compared appraisal values of homes owned by whites and people of color. Using statistical techniques, they say, they were able to compare the change in appraised values of comparable homes in comparable neighborhoods in comparable metro areas, meaning everything was the same in all of these neighborhoods there. They compared everything. The only difference between the neighborhoods was the racial composition of the residents of the neighborhood. So the researchers found that from 1980 to 2015, homes in white neighborhoods increased in value on average $194,000 more than in neighborhoods of color. What is more, they say, the rate of the gap in assessed values of these comparable homes in comparable neighborhoods, everything is the same except for the color of the people who own the home. They say that the rate of the gap in assessed values of these comparable homes in comparable neighborhoods is getting larger over time. This is substantial and unearned wealth creation. That they don't have generational wealth because their parents worked harder than ours. They don't have generational wealth because they have better degrees. They were smarter than us. They made smarter investments. No. They have generational wealth because of the unearned wealth that is created by racial segregation that they continue to demand, particularly in home ownership. For the past 20 years, the researchers say, they studied why We have racially segregated neighborhoods still. We know why we had them in the past. They say it was the law in many places, of course, and racially biased practices like redlining and restrictive covenants. They were commonplace. Everybody did it all over the place in this country. But such practices were supposed to be outlawed in the 1960s with the passage of the Civil Rights Act, right? We've had a lifetime to integrate, right? Yet, there has been little change. In fact, they found in their recent study that once they accounted for the growing racial diversity of the nation's metro areas, they actually found that this country is more segregated now than it was in the 1960s. Understand what this means. The more diverse cities with more than 500,000 people become, the white people in those cities want to live farther and farther apart from those more diverse, more multitudinous people. The more diversity area there is in a place, the less white people want to be involved with it. That, dear friends, this fact that this country is more segregated now than it was in the 1960s, despite the civil rights legislation, despite DEI programs, and all the unfair things that white conservatives said were done to give unqualified Black and brown and other non-white people unfair advantage over allegedly more qualified white people, is one of the most important things that conservatives of both parties do not want white people to know. So they have shaped the media experience of white people to keep that truth from them, and it's also kept from you. In conducting this research on where white people want to live and who they want to live around and why, the researchers found that white Americans overwhelmingly live in majority white neighborhoods. And when asked why they live where they do, this is what they said. Though they often communicate a preference for diversity, the researchers found that most whites' definition of diversity is quite limited. They mean not more than 20% white. Meaning that even if their definitions of neighborhood diversity were realized, most white people will still live in overwhelmingly majority white neighborhoods. Because if they live in a neighborhood with 100 families in it, 100 homes, they only want about 20% diversity. So they only want about 20 Black families and maybe not even whole Black families, because really it's like 20 Black people, 20 Black or brown people, any 22, 26, 30. Oh no, they're moving. The whole neighborhood, most of the neighborhood moving away. This is the other thing they said. Whites actually live in neighborhoods with less racial diversity than what they claim they want. That's not an accident. They didn't accidentally buy a house in a neighborhood with no non-white people in it. They sought those places out. Then they found that whites often operate only in a white network of friends, realtors, and family, showing them white neighborhoods. Now, they know Black and brown people exist. So after the fourth neighborhood where you don't see any Black people, shouldn't you start asking, why? Why do you keep showing me all these white neighborhoods? But many don't do that. And then while whites say they don't mind living near African Americans and Hispanics per se, they do mind living where crime is high, educational quality is low, the neighborhood looks unkempt, or housing values are declining. This is what they say, because whites see these characteristics as true of most Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. So even though they won't say, I don't want to live around Black people because I think that they bring neighborhood property values down, that's what they mean. When they say things like, I don't want to live in a neighborhood where the schools are bad. I don't want to live in a neighborhood where the homes are unkempt. I don't want to live in a neighborhood where the property values are low, because Black and brown equals low property values for white people in this country. And that is based on historical racism. But again, it is also perpetuated by the narratives they get from media, particularly their news. So research has shown that despite what they say, most white people in this country actually avoid living with, around, near, or having much to do with people who are not white and like them, regardless of crime levels, neighborhood appearance, educational quality, housing value. Even if neighborhoods that are full of black and brown people have all of those things that they want, white people will still be like, I don't care how good the school is. It's too many black and brown people here. We're not living here. That is why this country is more segregated today than it was before the Civil Rights Acts were passed. So when we are looking at what these folks want to consume, choose to consume, and what they are given in the media they are consuming in regard to national news and the issues we struggle with, the issues that we are trying to correct about our continued oppression, the reason they continue to vote for our continued oppression is because they're still getting the racist, white supremacist media narratives about the criminal, lazy, slovenly, illegal, dangerous, gang member, blacks, browns, immigrants. Donald Trump is not making up these narratives. These racist narratives are American, and they have been peddled by Democrats and Republicans who are very, very socially and politically conservative in regard to equality and justice for people who don't look like them. So Sinclair and Nexstar Media are just doing the work for the empire that they all support. That's what we need to understand about this media landscape we exist in now. So this leaves me, I think, with a question I want to leave you. Now that you know that there is another layer of responsibility in this media question, what's your next move going to be the next time you feel like you need to boycott somebody or something? Make sure you're hitting the right target, folks. But that's all the time I have for today. Thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode of Darker Than Blue. I'll be back next week. Until next time, a luta continua, the struggle continues. But if we keep telling the truth, y'all, Victoria is certa, victory is certain. Peace. Ooh, all right, just a tiny, I say that every time, and it always ends up being like damn near 40 something minutes. Excuse me, but it will not be today because you can hear I've got a little bit of still some of this left from the sinus infection. A little hot. Need to open a window, and I probably just need to go and get some sleep because it's been a very, very busy week. Very crazy. I got a lot of writing to do tomorrow because I've got to finish this book. Everything that is happening now in this country, and just about everything that I've talked about, I think in the past, I don't know, few years at least. Yeah, definitely since 2023, definitely since yeah, I think since 2023 is I am trying very hard to distill it in this book, because this book for me, yes, it is about why white Christians need to be more like John Brown, but it's less of a guide for telling them, hey, you need to be more like John Brown. It really is an examination of why John Brown was the only white Christian in this country who read the same scriptures that all the other white Christians claim they read. And he was the only one who came up with what he did. And not only what he did, but what he committed his family to. Why was that? So that's what I'm taking a look at in this book. And as I'm kind of parsing out these ideas, I am trying really hard to bring in current issues that we're facing and the ways that white Christians have contributed to the bullshit or are responding in a way that is bullshit and ungodly and should cast them all into hell. But before they get there, I would like to take my pound of flesh out of them in this book. So So, look, I'm not a historian. I'm not an academic. I am not a theologian. I think I know what exegesis means. And then there's another word that I can't even pronounce that it means like the opposite of exegesis. Yeah, it's very confusing. But like I have no expertise in any of the things that I am writing other than I'm a Christian and I read my Bible and I understand a lot of the historical context of some of the absolute bullshit that's in that book that we take out of context because we don't know the historical context of it. And I take my faith very seriously for myself, for what I am supposed to do with this life and the people who come in contact with me in its sphere. That is the extent of the relevance of my faith to my work. It is what I lean on to help me keep going to do what I'm doing. Particularly when I don't feel like it, particularly when I don't want to. When I don't feel well, when I feel like I've been attacked, when I feel like people are being mean to me, when I feel like everybody's got a damn criticism you know what I mean? That can wear on you. That can, ooh, good God. That's a lot. Like, man, every time I'm in front of the camera, somebody's got some shit to say that can get to you, and it can skew your perspective if you're not careful. And I've had to wrestle with this, where you have to stop yourself from paying attention to only the negative shit people say, and you have to force yourself to look at all of the other support that you have, which can be very difficult, because aren't the people who have the most bullshit, who have the least to actually contribute, who are doing the absolute least, aren't they the ones who are the fucking loudest and the most persistent? And just, yes. But that's that's my perspective on, that's how I situate my faith. So me writing this book is an extension of how I live my faith, and how I use it to engage with other people who claim they're people of faith, but I see the bullshit. So for me, this book is me as a Black Christian telling white Christians, we have seen your bullshit this whole fucking time. Either you're going to put a stop to this shit, or we're going to have to deal with you on the way to us putting a stop to this shit. You don't have any other option right now, because look at all this bullshit you did. And how come you couldn't just do half of what John Brown did? We're not asking you to pick up arms and go do blah, blah, blah. But damn, can you at least join the right kind of protest? Don't be going to protests talking about telling people, well, you have to be nonviolent and free Ukraine. So that is and that is a woo, that's a lift, because it's hard not to include everything. Because of course I want to talk about how people are lying on Russia. And the people can be great on Palestine, but then they'll turn around and say, Putin invaded Ukraine and he's a dictator. I'm like, oh my God. It's like, or you get somebody like Zohran Mamdani, who says President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela and President Miguel Diaz-Canel of Cuba are dictators. And he's supposed to be a democratic socialist that everybody, woo, yay, a couple months ago. And we anti-imperialists, but for what, we were just like, all right, just let the progressives have their moment, because we know in a couple of months we gonna have to say, I told you so. And here we are. I want to include all of these kinds of examples of um, of people's lack of real liberation, anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist politics, particularly people of faith in this book. But I have a word count limit, and I've been struggling with that. So I've had to I wrote a lot, and I've had to go in and cut a bunch of it out and drop it on the cutting room floor and be like, well, maybe they'll want me to write another book if this one isn't so terrible. Um, but that is the difficulty for me right now. I recognize that people who have never seen anything like this before, what's going on, people who are younger than me, people who weren't born in 1996 and don't remember the Clintons, and the bullshit they did, and the Democratic Leadership Council, and Al Fromm, and the third way strategy emerging from the Democratic Party, and the pivot from working class and poor people and labor issues on their platform to these right-wing conservative talking points about tough on crime and ending entitlements, and pushing more entrepreneurship, black capitalism 2.0 on steroids from the Democratic Party, sounding more and more like Republicans. And then Republicans, of course, just went full fascist, right? Yeah, I know plenty of people, a lot of you are much younger than me and were not born then and do not remember that. And I have to keep that in mind when I'm going through all of this history, because I have to remember that I have to include detail that might not be a big deal to me, but will explain how this was allowed to happen to people who weren't even around when it did. So they cannot fathom how things weren't always this way, right? And I think I'm trying really hard to explain to people, you're right, things weren't always this way. This is how things got this way, but let's be clear. Really? Things were always this way. It just wasn't as blatant as it is now. Because the same ideas that facilitated these things being done, that's America. All this bullshit that people talk about, oh, this is not the country I know. Yes, it is. It is. It is, because the people who are passing this legislation and voting for Trump and not caring about the Epstein files now and really believing that Portland is being burned to the ground by Antifa. These are the people These are the people who want the National Guard deployed to these places because they do believe it. These are the people who are the grandchildren of the folks who took their parents to lynchings. Do you understand what I'm saying? That all of those women and those high school girls and their mamas in those pictures where they were harassing Ruby Bridges and all of those little black children who integrated those segregated high schools, or primary schools or whatever schools in the South. Those people, most of those people are still alive. Ruby Bridges is in her 70s. She is still alive. So the people who are harassing that child, spitting on her, throwing rocks on her, a child, pulling her hair, assaulting her, they're still alive too. And a lot of them are CEOs, on the boards of directors, in local politics. These old, fat, decrepit bigots are sitting in state houses across this country, railing like psychopaths about gay, queer, trans Antifas with their Black Lives Matter partners and their they, them pronouns. You understand? These people, they believe this shit, and they believe it not because it is being indoctrinated. They don't believe it because they're being indoctrinated about it now through media consolidation. Oh no, what they're getting now is the confirmation of the racism that they lied about. Right? This is why they live in all white neighborhoods now, even though they say, well, I would like to live in a more diverse. You can, you just chose not to because you really hate black people and brown people. And you know, it's not polite to say that anymore, where back in the day, your grandmama and them could happily go outside and spit on a black girl trying to go to a school to integrate it. These people know that today is not that time. So they cannot say and do the things that their grandparents and great grandparents did, some of them their parents, back then. So they do this kind of shit. They get interviewed. Oh, I think we've made some racial progress. And I know there are still problems, but I would really love to live in a more diverse neighborhood. But I have a family and I don't want to live in a crime-ridden neighborhood. They're talking about black folks because they think we're all criminals. Because they've always thought we are. That's what they've said. Oh, I don't want to live in a neighborhood where, the property values are depressed. They're talking about black people because they have always believed that black people are dirty, that we don't know how to take care of our properties, that we won't take care of our properties. If we rent, then we're going to tear it up. And guess what? Some of us believe that shit too. Because you grew up hearing that kind of shit about people on welfare in Section 8. And those people, if you were black, they were black. So we would say this kind of bullshit when we start making a little bit of money and thinking we middle class. Oh, I don't want to live around Section 8 people. That was black people talking about black people, but poor black people. Right? So that is how the racism turns into classism. When the people who are oppressed think they get a foothold in society that gives them a little bit more comfort and security than the people below them have. So then they start to adopt the attitude of the oppressor class, the ruling class, toward the people below. So these white people, they're not going to say I don't want to live around a bunch of immigrants because I don't want to live in a neighborhood where 15 people live in one house and all their cars are parked on the front lawn. They're not going to say that, but when they say things like they don't want to live in a neighborhood where the homes are not well kept, that's what they mean. And we say the same thing. When we move into a nice little middle class neighborhood full of black folks like PG County, then we start talking about, oh my God, I hope the Mexicans don't live because for 15, 20 of them live in one house. We are clowning these people because they understand community and collective economics and family support. And here we are out here trying to prove to the white man that does not want to live anywhere near us that we can make it on our own. And their home values increase by more than $194,000 over the homes in the middle class neighborhoods that we spend too damn much money on in black neighborhoods, thinking that we done made it. And we don't even realize we get raked over the coals by the real estate company and the mortgage company because, of course, we pay the black tax. It doesn't matter how much money we make. It doesn't matter how good our credit is. We still pay the black tax for a home that is just like a home in a white neighborhood. The income is the same as the white homeowner. The schools are just as good. The crime is at the same level, the low and non-existent. But how come our mortgage is more than theirs? How come our interest rate is higher than theirs? How come our mortgage payment is higher than theirs? For a smaller house, we pay more money for less house. And here we are thinking we made it, and we shitting on poor folks, poor black folks, poor immigrants, because they live in 15 to a house. Okay, so it's been a struggle. It's been a struggle to kind of in the past 6 months, I guess, while I've been struggling with really seriously writing this book, really getting my thoughts about liberation theology and its importance to me as a person, its importance to me as a Christian, and its importance to me as an organizer, but also historically. And what does that mean for what we gonna do with these white people? That, I think that's kind of it. Like, for me as a Christian, the big question for me, I think, is, man, what are we gonna do with these people? Because, spiritually, that I can't do anything about that. I don't have a heaven or a hell to put anybody in. So, I hope they go to hell. Their behavior, according to the book, says they go into hell, but I don't have any control over that. Excuse me. But my question, and I guess this is a question that I'm asking of white people who will read the book, who'll actually get through it without throwing it in the trash, which, I don't care at that point, because if you buy it, I got the money and I ain't giving it back. So, I don't care if you read it or not, just buy it. But I think for people who would read the book, and get to the end of it, I think the question ultimately is, what are y'all going to do about the fact that we know you've been lying about Christianity, period, the whole time? What are you going to do when you finally have to be confronted with what you've done? Now, I don't know what that is going to look like, that confrontation. I don't know who's going to make that confrontation, but I do know that is something that is in the back of their minds. It is. It absolutely is. Please believe me when I tell you that these people, it's not that, and I don't think it's a case of morality, but it is a case, I think, of consequences have actions, or actions have consequences, rather. They know this. They know that they have lied. They know they've stolen. They know they continue to lie. They know they continue to steal and kill and lie about doing those things and deflect and blame other people. They know this. They are not unaware of what they are doing and saying, and the consequences their actions and words have on us. At this point, they're clear that they cannot get rid of all of us. They know this. They know. And these things that are being done now is almost kind of a delaying tactic for the reckoning that they know is coming. That's what this is. All of this frantic, frenzied, oh, we've got to bring the hammer down on all these made up Antifa, and Antifa, a founder's girlfriend, and Black identity extremists, and Democrat communists. No, this is all them trying to build up a bulwark, a wall, a seawall, to keep the wave of reckoning that they know they have created from doing as much damage as they know they deserve. I really do believe that is true of many of these people. I think they believe that they can somehow insulate themselves from the worst of the reckoning. I think they believe they can, build a bunker or a haven on the. I don't know, but they really think that they can ultimately, maybe not entirely get away with this, but get on the other side of it somewhat unscathed, and leave the wreckage to the rest of us while they go somewhere. It's not going to work out the way they're expecting. It's not going to work out the way they're planning. The only thing is, I don't know how it's going to work out, but I do know, because I've seen it enough throughout history. And I do believe history is an excellent teacher, and also a pretty reliable predictor of future human events. The ruling class and the rich, even in this empire, the oppressor class, the white supremacists, the bigots, the transphobes, the homophobes, the xenophobes, the Islamophobes, the sexists, the ableists, the people who want to lock people up for taking Tylenol, the people who want to cure autistic people to make them normal, they know that their time is coming to an end, because they also know all empires end, and they know the fate of the heads of those empires and all of the people who propped them up. They're trying to be the exception to the historical rule in regard to empires and the way they eventually go. They will not be. I don't know if we will see that in my lifetime, but I believe we will see the reckoning of the ruling class in this country having to be held account for what they have done to us and the rest of the world. So that's why I do what I do. That's why I keep going despite many times not wanting to, despite way too often being too tired, despite way too often really not wanting to see another nasty comment from somebody, which, like I said, doesn't happen a lot. I'm just real sensitive about my shit. That's all. I'm very much like Erykah Badu. I am sensitive about my art. And for me, this is art. So thank you so much for your constant support. I love you all. Thank you very much. Y'all on Instagram, I see you. I always forget to shout y'all out. Presence, what's going on? Jenny MCG, Evan Bookman, Ann Wilcox. Hey, Ann. Majed Latif. Hey, Sacred Ground Project. Yay. Dialectic 14. Thank y'all so much for joining. I appreciate you. You fantastic people on YouTube. James Yipper, Jesse, Esme, Marvin Walker, Chitimacha. Let's see who else I got. Manny, Sinichal, Terry Conley, Dejuma. What's going on? I'm so happy to see you. Tara, thank you for joining me. I appreciate you. Amen. Ken Batauman. I am sorry, but hey. Thank y'all so much for your support, for joining me. Zizway, what's going on? It's good to see you. The Paisley Project. Hey there. Thank you so much. Rouse Pasta Sauce, as always. Thank y'all so much. I will see you all next week, and I'll see you in the streets too. Y'all take care. Peace. Yeah.